MBA admissions committee as well. So I'd request all of you who are here to put in any questions that come up throughout our talk in the chat window, and if we have time towards the end, we'll address it then. I'm Niyati Dave. I'm a senior counselor at Reach IV, and I've been there for the last 10 years or so. Reach IV is a boutique a consulting firm that works with career guidance, educational guidance. We also offer test prep services, so you can check out our website to find out a bit more about the work we do and how you can get in touch with us in case you'd like to work with us. Um, Rebecca, I'd like you to maybe tell us a bit about your role, your background, and sort of what you do at Yale.
Sure. Thanks, Niyati. As mentioned, my name is Rebecca Melville, and I'm the Managing Director of Financial Aid and a member of the MBA Admissions Committee. I've been at Yale for quite a while, since 2006, and have worked at a couple of different business schools doing admissions and a variety of student services roles. So I do the traditional MBA admissions things. I've been lucky enough to have gone to India multiple times. Always try to tack on a cool little side quest as well while I'm there. And yeah, I've been in this industry since the year 2000, so probably longer than some of you have been alive, sadly.
Yeah, and it's great that you get to share your expertise with our students. So we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
To begin with, I know that I think it's like one of those things that really stands out, right? Each MBA program does have a specific character, and Yale in particular has a lot of things that make it unique. So could you maybe tell us a bit about both the school, its history, its mission, as well as the MBA program and what sort of differentiates it in terms of its curriculum and strengths and sort of what makes it distinct as well from other MBA programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Yale School of Management is specifically called a School of Management because we actually didn't even offer MBAs until the year 2000. We initially offered, because our mission is to educate leaders for business and society, we initially offered a master's in public and private management. And then that sort of evolved into the MBA over time. But that we always go back to the mission of educating leaders for business and society, because that sort of awareness of moving through communities in an intentional way, I think, is sort of baked into our DNA and who we are as a school. I think the value that you have by attending this Reach Ivy webinar today is to really go beyond that website, because I am empathetic to the fact that a lot of our websites are going to say the same things. But I do want to spend a few minutes telling you what we think is kind of distinctive about our program. And the first is that you are coming to Yale University. So Yale, probably very few of you, even if you've been to the United States, have had a reason to go to New Haven, Connecticut. So if you picture where Boston is, and then you go down the Atlantic coast a little bit to New York, we are a little closer to New York than Boston, but an hour and a half brings you right to the Grand Central Station with the beautiful constellation ceiling, and New York City, and then 2 hours will take you right to downtown Boston, and then Washington D.C. is a little south from New York City. So we're in a really nice location and corridor, but the business of New Haven, Connecticut, is by and large Yale University. That being said, it's a city that packs a punch of 1 million people, even though it's much smaller than that. And that's because we have 12 different graduate and professional schools that are intentionally kept small. So we're by far the biggest graduate and professional school. And we want to force you to forge connections across this large research university. So if you think about it as leaders of next generation, are you better off going out from your MBA program with a network of high achieving peers from just a standalone business school or from Yale Law School, from the School of Public Health, from the medical school, and all of the different other schools that we have. So we do things like our second year is all electives. If you don't want to take a single class at the School of Management, you don't have to. Nobody's ever done that. But go ahead and take courses at the Yale School of Drama. For example, we encourage you to do that. We have pan-wide Yale centers, like our entrepreneurship center. We call it Sci City, the Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale. Because, if you're going to launch a business, maybe you don't want to do that with just 3 MBAs in a room. Maybe if you're launching a stroke detection device, you want to have somebody who's an MD or going to be a medical doctor, or somebody in public health, with one of our executive MBA programs. So in a co-curricular fashion, we also have abilities that will have you, again, forge and take advantage of coming to a preeminent research university that is sort of strategically located. We have the highest number of joint degree students, so students who are formally pursuing 2 different degrees at Yale University at the same time. And happy to answer any questions on that as well. So I think the first distinctive thing is, some MBA programs, you're going to go to a standalone MBA program, whether that's physically they're isolated, or they have limitations on how many credits will count towards your MBA. We are the opposite. We want you to make use of all the resources across Yale University. I think the second way in which we are distinctive is the way that we teach graduate management education. And that is, since 2006, we've been teaching our core curriculum from the perspectives of the stakeholders involved in making decisions. So, the world is not getting less complex, right? It's not... there's a lot of different kinds of market economies, governments in place, et cetera. And leading through ambiguity and complexity is obviously a key part of your learning and your future as a leader. And so when you arrive on campus and start your core curriculum, which is required coursework for the whole year, the first several weeks, 7 weeks to be precise, will be some of those things that you expect out of an MBA program. I don't think they're going to be a surprise to any of you. Accounting, game theory, microeconomics, some modeling, of course, in psychology called careers, those sorts of things, right? Really to get you the toolkit to what we say is leveling the playing field, because people come in with a variety of different backgrounds and experiences and comfort with some of this vocabulary. After that, you enter now into the messy part of the curriculum, or what we think is very distinctive. And that is, again, these perspectives courses. So, for example, you don't take a course in like Marketing 101. You're going to take a course called The Customer. And you're not going to take a course in called Competitive Strategy. You are going to take the Competitor. And that's going to be co-taught by ladder track faculty in economics as well as accounting. So a good example of a case that they use in the Competitor on occasion, and again, these cases are developed in-house here at Yale. We call them the raw cases to enable these perspectives. Like, they don't come cooked, right? They're the opposite of that. They're messy, but they do sort of triage some of the information sources that you're going to need. So, of course, a case that you may look at in the Competitor is when Cosmopolitan launched in China, right? That's not a marketing issue. That's not a strategy issue, right? There's politics, there's demographics, there's all sorts of things that come into play. And just to illustrate how messy issues are, and that was a long time ago, right? That issues are in the real world. So another course would be sourcing and managing funds. You're the CFO. How do you leverage debt and equity to actualize on the strategic priorities of the organization? Likewise, the flip side is there's a course called The Investor. You're looking at the companies from the outside in. And the capstone course is called The Executive. So you're the CEO. And then at the end of the core year, we start, you need to take at least one elective. Your second year is all electives. So I think that's a very unique way of teaching graduate management education. And then the third piece I would say is because you're at Yale, a little bit, but we think of ourselves as the most global US business school. And how we actualize that is that we participate in the Global Network for Advanced Management. So it's over 30 schools across a variety of different markets, across a variety of different government systems, wealth levels. Um, and we give our students the opportunities, again, not only to connect across Yale, but to connect across this network of elite MBA programs. Many of the MBA programs, though, are not the equivalent of a US 2-year degree. You probably know this from some of the programs you may be looking at in India. And so, but we give as an MBA student, you have the opportunity to go to bespoke programs that are developed for a week at a time at some of our partner schools. Like if you want to talk about female entrepreneurs in the developing world, you should probably go to the University of Indonesia, whose faculty are experts on that. And they will give you a 5-day course on that. We actually help pay you to do that. We pay you to do that partially. And so those are offered a couple times a year. Likewise, graduates from those schools can actually apply to do post-MBA degrees here on campus. And how that changes the discourse in your electives in your second year is that all of a sudden it goes from being, international students, so from all over the world, are roughly 40% of the class. Now they're over half of the class. And I think that does change the discourse as well. So we'll force you to go somewhere that isn't India or somewhere that you haven't been and have an international experience as well. But that's just, baby piece of how we define ourselves as a more international US business school. So those are the 3 big distinctive characteristics, I would say, Nayati.
And it does sound like it is geared towards addressing complexity and nuance across the board, right? And getting exposure to sort of new ideas, new markets, also fostering that sort of cross-disciplinary connection and allowing it to be sort of more integrated as well with Yale, the entire sort of ecosystem of Yale University. I also wanted to ask if you could maybe tell us a bit more. A lot of students tend to, I think the answer, you've already touched on it, but the MBA is also seen in a sense as sort of a degree that allows a certain pivot or a career switch, or might even like foster entrepreneurial kind of interests. So I'm wondering if there are classes or sort of resources that students can avail of that might help them in case they're looking to pivot. Or is there like any sort of particular offerings that might support them if they're looking to form sort of an entrepreneurial journey?
So I'll address the pivot. I think probably, frankly, over 70, I'm going to say 75%. At most students are coming to Yale SOM to at least explore the possibilities of their career, right? But many of them are looking to make a pivot, either that's industry or function or geography. And then the others, I would say, are here to accelerate a current career path. And so this is what we do, right? This is our wheelhouse. We do not expect you to have it all figured out in your application or even when you arrive. In fact, one of the first things we're going to do is invite our alumni back to campus, sit on panels, career-oriented panels, and say, okay, all of our new students come in. This is what a career in commercial banking looks like, for example. These are what our alumni, these are the kinds of careers they have in nonprofit management, right? There's investment banking. These are the careers our students have in investment banking. And so to really educate you on what those possibilities are, we know what the recruiting cycle looks like for consulting, for investment banking, for example. But frankly, so do all of the US elite programs. You're going to be in good hands there. But we will help you in identifying some of or at least honing in on your post-MBA goals. So in our application, when we ask you what you're thinking to do with this MBA, we want to know that you have a general directional sense, but we don't want you to pretend that you're more certain than you actually are, right? You need to have developed some ideas about your career interests and goals. and how you will position yourself, or you are positioning yourself in order to pursue those, right? But we don't hold you to those. So our career offices, I think, across any, I probably shouldn't speak for my peer colleagues, but for my peer schools, but I think you are in really good hands at any elite U.S. business schools. I think what is unique to Yale about the career search is that we actually have a lot more students doing more bespoke job searches. And so our career office often ends up serving as a sort of GPS for our students and their more unique job searches. So we, again, consulting, finance, those are sort of, we know those really, really well. But what we do really well at Yale is saying, okay, if you're interested in this, we have this employer. This is how we'll shine you up like a pretty penny. So, and here are the resources at Yale. So you mentioned entrepreneurship. The faculty person at Yale University, the dean of entrepreneurship at Yale, if you will, is Kyle Jensen, and he is actually, his appointment is at the School of Management. So he sits at the School of Management and he teaches the curriculum on entrepreneurship. So there's the academic piece. Then there's the co-curricular piece. I think I mentioned Sci-City, or the Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale. It's actually, a 5-minute walk at the School of Engineering. And it is, again, a clearinghouse for all of our Yale students interested in entrepreneurship, an opportunity to fight in case competitions, to get to know each other, spread ideas, have visitors. And so there are a lot of different, if you're interested in healthcare, there's a healthcare management conference that is probably the best student conference run in the country, that is run by public health, medical school, and our students. So there are a lot of opportunities both in the classroom as well as, I would say, co-curricular, where Yale is part of the equation, but not necessarily for academic credit.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also very curious about sort of what you mentioned about the more niche job searches. And I'm also wondering, in a sense, that, we talked a bit about what makes Yale distinct as well. And it sounds like there have been alumni or current students who've gone off beat in terms of maybe not choosing that investment banking or consulting career that you'd expect with most MBA programs. So, in the spirit of that, I'd also like to ask you, in terms of fit, what sort of students would be a good fit for the Yale program in terms of their traits, the kind of experience. Of course, it's a diverse cohort, but what would you say would make somebody a good fit, or you know you'd encourage somebody of a certain profile to consider Yale?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, but I always tend to turn those questions back on the applicants, because we can only admit the people who apply, right? And so I think there's a self-selection process that happens now. That's why everybody here is attending your event, because they want to have a sense of, beyond the website, how do I know that these are my people? This is my program. I'm going to get out of this what I want to get out of it. And so I'd say do your homework, look at the class profiles, right? That every school will have a class profile. What are the industries people come from? What are the, for you guys, the GPAs are kind of meaningless because you have a very different educational system. But what are the GMAT or GRE equivalent scores or GMAT focus scores that are in that profile? Ultimately, all of us want students who are in our classroom who are smart, right? And who have good jobs and are doing them really well. And that's it. What I see as the people who apply to Yale are people who are intellectually curious and broad-minded. And again, I mentioned, very mindful of how they move through the communities. That sounds kind of fluffy American, if you will, but I think that most of our applicants are good people, right? They've done things to help their society or their communities. But the people who I see who are interested in us, who apply to us, are people who understand that their impact is broader than just their job, that it is, again, it impacts all of the people in their communities. and will make use of the fact that they're coming to Yale. They want to meet people, they want to bounce off people intellectually, and they want to learn. If you want to go and work on Wall Street and do just finance and only hang out with finance pros, this is probably not the place for you. But if you want somebody who works at the the Wildlife Foundation, as well as plenty of people from Wall Street and plenty of people from consulting, as well as people who sorry, came in from the hospitality industry. I think this is more the program for you. How I can statistically show you the job niche piece would be, again, go to the employment profile. What you'll see for Yale is, versus some of the other schools, at some schools, the top 5 industries will take 90 to 95% of their graduates. And so at Yale, that's not the case, right? That number is closer to 75%. So that's what I say when we're doing a lot more niche jobs. Still, the bulk of our students go into finance and consulting. Frankly, that's going to be the bulk of students from India. But there are a lot more students who make these conversations more, I'm biased, I would say, interesting.
Yeah, it does sound like there's quite a mix of sort of diverse viewpoints and people coming in also from different backgrounds. Could you also just walk us through this year's application and maybe what you're looking for in terms of the essays, what the application looks like, what an applicant can expect to have to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. So I don't think much of what we require will be a surprise to those of you who have already done a little sleuthing in the MBA admissions world, right? We need to see transcripts. We need to see a test score. We do not waive test scores. So that's either a GRE or a GMAT. We do not have a preference. We want a resume. And this can sometimes be hard for students from India, but it should be 1 page, please. And we, part of that process is we also ask you about your short-term goals and your long-term goals. And again, I think we addressed that a little bit earlier. We also want people who can tell us about, not just your resume tells us about you from your perspective, and also for me, chronologically sort of guides me as I look at your application. So that's usually where I start. But we also want to hear what other people say about you. So we need 2 recommendations. 1 should be from a current supervisor. That's not always possible. We understand. But we do need 2. And then we ask for things like, what do you do outside of work? Sometimes people do things outside of work. Sometimes people don't. And then we ask some information about your background and an essay. Most MBA programs will have some sort of bespoke essay. We have a few different topics. I'll address all of these more individually and in buckets. I'm just going through the list here right now. A couple of things that are unique to Yale, though, are the behavioral assessment, the video questions, and we do also have interviews for students who are interested in admitting. So I don't think the interview is necessarily unique to Yale, but I'll address those pieces in a minute. So I want to go back to sort of the buckets, if you will. So the first bucket would be your academic preparedness, right? So we're looking at, in your transcripts, we're going to be looking at every course you took. It's more than, did you graduate first class, second class upper, first class with distinction. We really want to see all aspects of your academic path and the courses that you've taken. We love it when we see people who are quantitatively ready to start this program. Again, the math in an MBA program is not particularly that challenging, but you will be overwhelmed if you don't have any quantitative coursework. It's not a prerequisite, but it does show that you're serious about applying to an MBA program. Now, most of you cannot go back and redo your undergrad education. So you can also make up for having lesser math on your transcript by having a really great test score and the math section of the test score, right? The quant section of a test score. That's usually enough because that's the level of math that you'll be dealing with. And so your focus should now be on, just sharing your transcripts. If there's any blips, let us know in the optional information section. But we don't really look for official transcripts at this point. We just want to see your academic record, and don't worry, we'll get an official transcript out of you as well. We do, again, go back to those class profiles. That'll tell you, frankly, whether you're competitive or not for every MBA program, because we give the 80% margin of, so these were the scores in the middle 80%. That means 10% are above it, 10% are below it. So if you think you're in the 10%, it's up to you to explain that, right? Anytime you have information where it feels like, maybe that's not the norm of what they see based on the statistics I see, explain it, right? You'll feel better about yourself. Then again, we're looking at test scores. They're one piece of a larger picture. We turn down people with perfect test scores all of the time, but they have a limited purpose. There's a strong correlation between how well you do on the tests and how well you will do in an MBA classroom. There's not a strong correlation between how well you do on a test and how great of a leader you will be, but we also want you to be academically prepared and challenged even, but certainly not overwhelmed. Now, sometimes people can't quite get that, but jump over that academic hurdle between their transcripts and their test scores. And if that's the case, then we use something that's bespoke to Yale called the behavioral assessment. It's actually not bespoke to Yale. It was developed by a former president of Yale, Peter Salovey, and is used routinely throughout Fortune 500 companies, as well at West Point. This is the United States Military Academy. They know a thing or two about training leaders. Now, the test I call it a test. The assessment it's a non-cognitive assessment, and I won't pretend to understand how it works. But basically, you can't study for it. You will have two statements coming at you at the same time, and you have to choose the statement that makes more sense to you, right? And they're not hard statements. They're not GMAT level statements. I'm going to be a little facetious with my example, but they will be, I like blue socks. I like green popsicles, right? Well, something like that. And there's a forced choice response. Again, I'm not an expert on this. The only time we use it is that because we know that the non-cognitive pieces that we measure relate well to success in the classroom, just like a test score does, that if you can't quite make that academic hurdle in any other way, if you have a behavioral assessment score of 4 or 5, those are the highest scores, we feel much better about you jumping over that last piece of the hurdle. Conversely, we never use it to bring people down. So if you have a 1, hello, every time I take it, I have a 1, and yet you've done phenomenally well and in undergrad, and you have a decent test score, we're not going to say, yeah, but BA1, right? We only use it to bring people up. We do accept we want all of your test scores, but we're really only going to evaluate you on your highest. But sometimes it's helpful to have a sense of, what you're capable of if that other score doesn't quite meet. We don't require TOEFL or anything like that. So those are the academic pieces I wanted to talk about: test scores, behavioral assessment, and obviously all of your transcripts. We do have people who have gone to graduate school, probably somewhere between a quarter and not quite a third have gone to graduate school. We need to see all of those transcripts. The next big piece I would call more leadership development. And so the pieces of your application that we're going to go to for those are: 1, your resume. Again, 1 page, not kidding, 1 page. And we even have a template on our website for under the work experience section of the application. There's a link to a sample resume. I don't love the format, but that's the format should you arrive at Yale that you're going to be forced to put your resume in. I don't care whether you use it. Nobody cares whether you use that template, but it is a good resource for you that shows you exactly kind of the information that we're looking for as you present your resume. Remember your audience. You're looking to get into an MBA program, not to get to your next SQL, Python, whatever coding job. And yes, I know I sound like an idiot talking about coding jobs. So we're going to look at your resume. And we also ask questions that sometimes are more helpful than not, right? We understand that this doesn't lend itself to everybody, but we're going to ask you to highlight your essential job responsibilities, but also, if it's a company that we may not know, provide a website. How many people work there? How many people do you supervise? What's your salary? What's bonus when you started? So all of these data points that, again, some of them are helpful and some of them are not, depending on the industry and where you're coming from and all of that sort of thing. And so it's certainly helpful if you come from a small company in India to really provide a website for us so we can get a sense of that. And then we also only want your full-time post-undergraduate work professional experience. And any kinds of internships or part-time work or activities or other places for those. And so we want to see those there. So resume, it is important how you communicate your goals, right? We ask you, what are your short-term goals? It's a drop-down. Long-term goals, it's a drop-down. But if you're making that transition, directionally, what is your plan? Have you thought about it? How are you preparing for this, right? Again, we're not going to hold you to it, but we want to have a sense that you understand that you're making a huge investment and incurring an opportunity cost, but you understand what it's going to take to get there, and that's going to have a very high return on investment. Now, again, the third piece that goes into this would be the recommendations, right? So 2 people, everybody should be able to find 2 people who can say nice things about them. We do ask for one, as I said, from a current supervisor, and both of your recommenders are going to be sent the same letter. So you go in and and it all happens via email, obviously. If you can't choose a current supervisor, we do understand, but we will ask you why. So just explain it to us. Recommendations should come from people who know your work, who know you really, really well. You can imagine that we get, over 4,000 applications a year. Everybody submitting 2 letters of recommendation. And of those 8,000 plus, we do not get many that say, Priya is solidly mediocre. Almost all of those recommendations are positive, as they should be. But the difference between a good letter of recommendation and a great letter of recommendation are examples. So why is Priya doing better at this already great job than the other people who are already great people, right? And why is Priya getting there faster, if you will? And so what other people say about you is really important. If your recommender prefers to write in another language, that's completely fine. They can use a translator, Google Translator, whatever tool you want. Please do not draft your letters of recommendation. I know this is hard. I know that in some countries and some cultures, that is the norm. It is not acceptable here. And I won't tell you, but I will tell you how, but I will tell you it is immediate, it is immediate deny if we see that. Trying to think of what else I could say about entrepreneur or recommendations. I think that probably covered it. So work experience would be the second bucket, leadership, impact, and part of that may be for people the activities they've done during undergrad, after undergrad, their other internships, so that would go into that pile as well, and under that rubric. And the third piece is a little more esoteric, and this is the piece that, frankly, makes our Indian candidates crazy, because our Indian candidates are, you guys go through so much testing and so many gates to get to where you are today, that it feels very esoteric and like a big black box. But it is holistic admissions, and it's something that we are pretty fond of here in the United States. But who are you? What makes you tick? What matters to you? And so we get at that through the essays in our application and a couple of other places, our video questions, as well as our interviews. But the essays, all MBA programs will have 1, 2, 3 essays, but ours are really around gaining insight into, again, your background, your passions, your responsibilities, how you identify your challenges, your communities, right? We want to triangulate your profile other than just grades, scores, work, but also, who you are. So we have 3 different essays, and we don't have a preference. Describe the biggest commitment you've ever made. Why and how did you do it? I'm paraphrasing a little. Describe the community that's been the most meaningful to you, right? What is the most valuable thing you've learned, and how have you contributed to that community? And then the third one is describe the most significant challenge you faced and how did you confront it and how did it change you, right? And so we don't have a preference. Do what brings you the most joy as possible in a required essay. But please don't write it like you think. You don't write it like, what does Rebecca want to hear? Most essays, again, nobody gets into an elite MBA program because they're really good at writing essays, right? Most essays are like, okay, that rounded out the profile nicely. Like, I'm not surprised, right? That's the vast majority of it. But sometimes people have gone through really awful things, and I don't want that for you as a mother, right? I want you to have had a very ordinary life, just done very ordinary things. But I want the people who've done them extraordinarily well. So another way in which we look at the piece of, what are you going to bring to us and what are we going to be able to bring to you as a community? We're looking for those community-minded people, the broad-mindedness throughout the essay is the video questions. So the video questions are the opportunity for you to literally give us your voice, right? So we want to hear from you directly. So the behavioral assessment and the video questions come after you hit submit on the application. So you'll hit submit, you'll pay the sliding schedule fee, and then we say, surprise, you're not done yet. You have 3 days to submit your video questions and your behavioral assessment. Going back to the behavioral assessment, I didn't tell you, you probably need 20 minutes. I keep saying you don't need to study for it. You actually can't study for it, so let that one go. But it'll take you about 20 minutes. The video questions will not take as long. There's 2 60-second responses, and they're kind of low-ball questions. They shouldn't be hard, right? They'll be like, I don't know, what piece of art do you like the most, sort of things. It's a way for us primarily to assess English language ability, I'll be perfectly frank, to give a little bit more of a multi-dimensional profile. It's something that we review at the very last, and honestly, the vast majority of them are fine, right? It's really hard to do really spectacularly when you're thinking on your feet like that. But we want to know that you can think on your feet. We want to know that once our career office gets a hold of you, they can shine you up like a pretty penny and put you in front of a recruiter eventually. But most people, perfectly fine, nothing wrong. I've seen some doozies, but remember, I've been doing this for 26 years. So I wouldn't sweat it too much, but do remember, once you submit and pay your fee, that there are 2 other pieces of the application. And then the interview is another place in which we get this. So if you're invited to interview, you're more than welcome to come on campus, but that seems a little unrealistic from India. We spend a lot of time looking at this to make sure there's no favoritism between people who come on campus and who don't come on campus. So do it via Zoom. You will be, and this is my piece of advice to you, is if you're looking at more than just Yale, the interview is going to be required by almost all schools, if not all, that you apply to in the United States. And this is one thing. So yes, there's an interview. Who, what, when, where, how, why, and how differ across the schools. So I recommend you make yourself a good old spreadsheet and put exactly that. Who's doing them? When did the interviews happen? Are they behavioral? Are there something else? Are they a group interview? When will they occur? So I'll answer these a little bit from the Yale perspective. So the vast majority of our interviews are done by second-year MBA students. This is a leadership position for them. It's also an opportunity because at this point in the process, your application's been reviewed I'm going to say at least once, probably multiple times. We really like what we see. And so it's an opportunity to have a student reach out to you so that should you be admitted, you have a contact there as well. And it's an opportunity, again, to get to know you. The vast majority of interviews are confirming information that we've already learned in your application. But our second year students won't know that because our interviews are blind, meaning all they have is your resume. They don't know what community has been the most important to you. They don't know your GMAT focus score. They don't know anything else. They only have your resume. So remember that in terms of who is your audience. Second year students with your resume only. It's a behavioral based interview. It's 30 minutes long. And it is not make or break for us. Again, it's almost always just confirming information that we suspect to be the case already. But it does come at a weird point because it does come after you submit. Wait, invited to interview, and then wait again, right? So it's pretty unusual to have a terrible interview. And we see far more high scores in our interview process. So those are the three buckets, again, in terms of how we look at candidates: academics, work experience leadership, and then the sort of more holistic community piece.
Thanks so much for that, Rebecca. That was incredibly detailed and gave, I think, a lot of insight into not just what the sort of different buckets are, but also what Yale emphasizes and what sort of you're looking for within them, and a lot of reassurances there too. I'm also struck by what you said about the essays being sort of the hardest part for a lot of Indian students, because that's sort of what I work on, right, with my students as well. And I think that leads me to also thinking about the kind of, I think, in the last couple of years with the advent of super easily available AI and ChatGPT, there's a lot more of that we're seeing playing out in the education space. And I was wondering, how has that changed how the admissions committee is assessing applications or reviewing essays? How is sort of Yale looking also at AI in the admissions process? I know how I feel about it. But curious to hear, what Yale is doing.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? We all have a personal opinion on it. And I have to say, believe it or not, this dinosaur was the one who introduced ChatGPT to the admissions office. And of course, I heard about it through my teenagers, right? I remember on Twitter, it came through that weekend, and then all of a sudden within 3 days, but it wasn't until in a meeting I said, watch this. And in a plenary session, I said to my colleagues, tell me how a combustion engine works and put it as a Bob Dylan song. And it wrote it right there, and they all went, we're screwed. So we actually do have, and a lot of MBA programs do have official policy on AI, but I'll just summarize it here. AI is like starting a conversation with 12 PhDs in a room. It is a great tool, right? We should be using it to help us all. I think it's draconian, and yes, it's ironic coming out of an old lady like me, but we've got to work with the tools that we have. What it also does is strips out your voice and creates sort of human robots. So it's kind of easy to detect. So don't use it for ideas. Don't use it for your voice. Is it okay to run it through a spell checker or run through AI as a spell, right? To sort of, it should be your work. It should be your thoughts. But we're also not dumb enough to believe that people are not going to use the tools that are out there, right? I will say it's pretty quick to see who used entirely ChatGPT. And I'm sure there are other tools out there too. That's the one I use. And who hasn't. So use it, but in a way that is still going to be true and authentic and genuine. That's all I'll say about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Thanks for that. I think another sort of thing that I wanted to address was that there's been a lot of changes in kind of US visa policies, and there's definitely a shift in terms of, how students are also considering schools, at least in India. And I'm curious if, what does that look like in terms of Yale, and, what kind of advice would you give to international applicants, especially from India, who might be feeling reticent or apprehensive about applying because of all of these changes?
Yeah, I mean, I empathize. I moved to the United States in 1997 and didn't become a citizen until 2019. So I empathize with the folks who have been an F1, a J2, EAD, H1B, TN. So I empathize with people coming to the United States as immigrants and non-immigrants for sure. I have slept out at what was, now is called the Department of Homeland Security in order to get visa appointments. Like I feel your pain for sure. And it is the nice way to say it would be an ever evolving landscape. In some ways, I think I'm uniquely able to talk with you because of the sort of the stress and the journey that I've taken. I think you're right to be concerned. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, right? I think there are some real pressure points there. I do think we have an incredible Office of International Students and Scholars, better than I think, frankly, any other university. They have, we have a small army of postdocs. They're just incredible, and they're an incredible resource for partner communities, etc. So I'm going to leave that there. We have funding resources equally available to international students and domestic students, so it's not like you're disadvantaged on the funding. On the visa front, I don't control that. I think you're right to be concerned. I will say the motivating factor that I don't think is really being marketed very well is that they are trying to get the most talented people from abroad and advantage people who are already in the United States. So I think what it's going to stop is the people who are coming on H-1Bs from sort of the software mills, right, and being paid lower salaries. Who it will actually help, that's my opinion, but I think, generally OSS is saying that actually the whole prevailing wage thing and the lottery being switched to be more advantageous to higher earners, and the lack of them will be helpful to the MBA students. So first of all, students who are already, so if you attend on an F1 visa, and then you usually spend some time on optional practical training associated with that F1 visa, so you're in the United States. Students who then enter into the lottery are given an advantage based on will be given an advantage based on their salaries. So MBA students will have high salaries. So that's already better than it is now. I know, just stick with me here. And then there is no $100,000 fee for people who are doing a change of status from within the United States. So they're trying to encourage these visas to go to people with American educations who are going to make a lot of money, right? So I can't put myself in your shoes. It's very stressful, but I actually think that this might benefit our MBA students. It's just like quite a lot. So I don't want to be overwhelmingly positive because I feel like changes are coming all the time, and you're right to be concerned. But I wanted to sort of reframe it as somebody who has been through the process and is a recent American. It's stressful, and it's your decision to make whether you want to take that stress. But I think it merits reframing in terms of what is the spirit there, and I think the spirit is actually to get people like this. Keep in mind, the Trump administration really does value MBAs.
And it's also good to hear that reframing as well, because I think there's a lot of noise around it, but hearing it and hearing your perspective, I'm sure is sort of reassuring for our students as well. I also wanted to kind of hone in on what you said about funding opportunities being equally available to international students, and maybe ask, and of course you are sort of the managing director of financial aid, so maybe ask a bit more about what sort of opportunities are available, and also what is sort of the eligibility criteria, how does one apply, what are kind of the specific details of that in terms of financial aid and funding?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, 2/3 of our incoming class actually had some sort of institutional money, so money from Yale.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it's another cut of the applicant pool, right? Maybe we need more people in consumer products, an amazing academic record. So it's one more cut of the applicant pool. And actually, our process is a little different in that you're admitted first, and then we say, if you want to apply for a scholarship, here's your opportunity to do so. So we give you a couple of different priority, and we ask you some more information. How are you going to fund this program? Why are you asking? And do you have any other sources? How are you going to fund it? Right? Other sources of funding. How much debt do you have? And we're not going to fill your need. The expectation at any MBA program is that in the United States, frankly, we have a different sort of tolerance for educational debt. And so the expectation is that, we may be able to help bring down the costs, but scholarships vary from $10,000 a year, so $20,000 total, which is a huge chunk of them, all the way up to full tuition and fees. But we do not offer scholarships for that include living expenses. So you're always going to have to be able to have some sort of resource available to you. We also ask you, what other schools have you been admitted to? Do you have money there, right? So we don't have unlimited money. We have to sort of allocate that judiciously. We do have specific program, like one program that I started a couple of years ago was our Global Leaders from India program. So we offer half to full tuition scholarships for certain students from India. So we don't have unlimited money, but it helps us sort of provide a little bit of institutional aid. The rest that you don't have resources for, you can borrow. So we do have an institutional loan where students can borrow up to 90% of the cost of attendance in US dollars. We're hoping to get to negotiate for some lower rates going forward. I'm optimistic on that, but we do have the ability for everybody to borrow through an institutional loan. And the only thing you need for that one is your letter of admission.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for that. I also wanted to ask if there are any kind of merit-based things as well. I think you mentioned the program for global leaders in India, but anything else that students from India could also look at?
Yeah, so again, our budget is for everybody, right? So again, international students writ large. There is the one scholarship that is our money that we give to international or to students specifically from India, but most Indian students will just get general, we call it Merit Plus, because we do ask for information around your background. Whenever the committee sees somebody who has come a much further distance than other people, right? We try, if we have money, we will try to reward that as well. So that probably disproportionately goes to students who are international, right? But more than that, I don't think we just have money, and international students are not relegated to only global leaders from India, right? You can also be given a Dean Scholarship or some other kind of award.
Thanks for that. I think that's the end of my questions. The sort of last thing I'd maybe like to ask you is if there was one sort of solid piece of advice you could give to students who are applying this year, what would it be? Very vague.
Yeah, no, I do actually have a piece of advice that I think I like to give to when I'm in India, because it's just a very test focused, and it's just the candidates we get from a country of like a billion people I put the candidates from this country to shame, right? I mean, every time I go to India, I'm like, wow, every person I interview is just better than the next. It's just a phenomenal talent pool. You all should be very proud of your educational system and your culture, and it's just fantastic. But I would say, that being said, focus on what you can control, right? So you can control how you connect the dots in your application, how you put that application together, right? You can't control your undergrad GPA anymore. You can control how hard you study for a test. You can control who you ask to write letters of recommendation, and you can take them out for coffee and say, Rebecca said, put some examples in there, right? Because she reads a lot of recommendations. You cannot control. There is no formula. So you cannot control who is in the competitive pool. You just cannot. And there are a lot of people from India in the competitive pool. And you are going to make yourself sick with worry if you try to get your head around that. And so many people from India writ large, right, try to but show me the calculation, right, the CGPA and the, right, doesn't exist. And so that you just have to sort of let go, because you cannot control that. So just put your best foot forward. You don't need to stand out. You stand out already as an individual, right? And so use the various pieces of the real estate of the application to build a case for why you're going to be a great Yale community member here and for the rest of your lives.
I think that's a good note to end on. And I think that's a good piece of advice as well that I feel resonates with what I constantly keep talking about with my students.
Bye.
I think we don't have enough time for questions, and I don't see any questions in the chat. So if we're good, we can just end here. Thanks so much, Rebecca, once again for sharing your expertise with us and for giving us such a detailed sort of overview of what the Yale MBA is like, what makes it distinct, and what you're looking for as well. Thanks everybody else for being here on a Friday evening. I'm sure you had more fun plans.
I don't know, Nadia. I think I'm.
Yeah, you were. I have so many questions about your India side quests. I think we do have a question from Samriti. Samriti, I don't see your question, but I do see that you want to ask a question on the GLI and the criteria. Samriti, could you maybe elaborate?
Yeah. Hi, Niti. I think it would be easier if I just ask an audio. So,
Yeah, sure.
Rebecca, thanks for the question. I just wanted to confirm, like, the global leaders in India, that scholarship, is it merit based or is it need based? And also, like, what are the criteria in case it is like merit based?
Again, no criteria, right? This is the holistic piece. It's one more cut. So it's both. So it's kind of, we start always with merit, right? So are you in the top tier according to, those three buckets I talked about, for people from India in particular for that one. And then, and it has to be a certain amount, right? It has to be half tuition. So, or at least half tuition. So are you in the top tier? And then there'll be a bunch of people. List family resources and really make those decisions in there. We tend to over award, right? Because no school has 100% yield, which means everybody we admit doesn't always come to Yale, right? They might go to another school. So we often over admit for that one as well, or over award for that one.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. So now we are at time, so we will have to close here. Thanks, everyone, and thanks so much once again, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.